I really wanted to be an astronaut when I was little. And she said, girls don't become astronauts. Cybersecurity teams are the most under-resourced, underfunded, underloved areas of the business. But one of the things they did that was kind of really great is...
Lianne, great to have you on the podcast. Thank you for coming. So when I was doing a bit of research into yourself before you came on...
E-buy gum.
I came across your LinkedIn.
Yeah.
More specifically, your tagline on LinkedIn. So I wanted to read out a few of the words in the tagline.
You mean my most humble of LinkedIn profiles? Yeah, okay.
So we've got head of SecOps, we've got anthropologists, we've got award-winning podcaster, author, keynote speaker, just to mention a few. The list goes on.
Yes.
So what I want to know is, from your initial education at Leeds Beckett Uni to a highly renowned cybersecurity expert, what does that story look like?
Ooh, well, yeah, so I wasn't always in tech. I really wanted to be an astronaut when I was little. I had my whole bedroom painted out with stars and planets and everything like that. Mostly influenced, I'll be honest with you, by the Alien movies. Loved Sigourney Weaver. It really shaped my childhood. As did Predator, to be honest. I liked all those. Great movie. But the school I went to, I told my teacher, this was like primary school, and I said, I want to be an astronaut. And she said, girls don't become astronauts. Which I guess, at the time, in a way, maybe they don't. But she said, you'd be much better studying something like English, which is what I went on to do, because it was kind of expected of me. I was the first one in my family to go to university, so I studied English literature, and then, boom, the recession hit. And so the 2008 recession hit, and I was like, I just need any kind of job. And so I spent a lot of years just kind of bumming around doing whatever work I could do, usually like lots of admin. Then I decided to go to revisit my roots in art school, and I set up a wedding photography business with my partner at the time, and we did that for 10 years. So I was a wedding photographer for 10 years. I oversaw over 300 weddings. But after about the 8-year mark, I was like, can I do this forever? I started, my knees were going, because it's a really kind of physically demanding job. And I was like, well, what's my backup plan? And I thought, well, you like culture, why not study anthropology? So I went back to university and I studied anthropology. I was originally going to study the culture of weddings because that's what I'd been living and doing for 10 years. But something else caught my eye, and that was the anthropology of digital cultures.
Right.
So I became a digital anthropologist. Now, anyone who doesn't know what anthropology is the study of human cultures. So the study of digital anthropology is how we engage with the online world. Now, at the time, there was actually a lot of pushback for me studying digital culture. People were just like, it's not real, is it? It's not ephemeral. It's ephemeral. It's not something you can really tangibly study because people don't act the same as they do online and things like that. Now, fast forward a few years, we do everything online. We practically live online. I would say we probably live online more than we do in the real world. So studying those cultures to me was very important, and it's influenced practically my whole tech career. Now, I was very lucky. I managed to get a job as an anthropologist, focusing on what's known as the digital divide. Now, the digital divide focuses on the theory that if you do not have access to online services, then you are socially disadvantaged in some way. And I was part of a charity that had £5 million to solve destitution in Leeds. And part of that was researching why were people all of a sudden facing such severe financial hardships. And at the time, the benefit system had moved online, almost like a switch overnight. And so we were finding people going into the job centre where they would normally go sign on and being pointed to a bank of computers. Now, if you've never touched a computer before, that is a very daunting task. So we were seeing the digital divide manifest itself in people not having the ability to be able to sign on online. So they were coming to us in our service and they had not eaten in days and they were about to be made homeless. Like the worst part, literally the destitution of life. And our job was basically just to do online forms for them. Whereas what I had to do as well then is go back to our funders and say, this is why destitution is on the rise, because you've gone so far with your technology and it absolutely neglected the most vulnerable people in society. I love that job. It was amazing to be able to kind of contribute in that way with the anthropology and understanding how digital cultures thrive and survive. I thought, well, how do I actually get really into technology? How do I not just kind of report on it and kind of discuss it from an anthropological perspective? How do I really get involved and influence decision making in that way? So I taught myself how to code. So I just used free online resources. So started off with Free Code Camp, Code Academy, YouTube videos. Leeds has an amazing tech scene, so I'd go to tech conferences, tech meetups in Leeds, and just absorb all this knowledge. And within about 6 months of treating learning how to code like a full-time job, lots of sacrifices, lots of cancelled plans and things like that, I managed to get a job at NHS Digital in their graduate scheme. Now, I was the oldest graduate there by miles. I think I was the only one there with a mortgage. So this was in my 30s when I decided to retrain. But it was wonderful. So I became a software developer for the NHS. And I think one of the reasons, apart from obviously I did the tech test, could pass that and things like that, it was the anthropology side that really they were interested in. It's like, how are you going to help us at the NHS, which is supposed to be for everyone, which is a lot of culture to consider? How are we going to build these digital products for the NHS that are inclusive? So that was the start of my tech journey.
Wow. So how did you go from there then to specifically cyber?
Yeah. So I was there doing my software development. I always had an interest in cyber, but what I found was when I was researching at the time, it was really difficult to get into cyber from a non-computer science background. Whereas with software development, they kind of took you on. If you put the effort in and you had a portfolio, they would kind of take you on as a career retrainer. Cyber wasn't like that. So I was like, right, okay, one of the best ways if I want to get into cyber then is, do the software development and just put myself forward for any kind of cyber work that would come along. And anyone listening to this who is a software developer or works in tech at all will know that nobody wants to do the cybersecurity jobs in a team. So me being able to put my hand up and say, hey, I'll do the pen test remediation. I'll make sure we'll do the code reviews from a secure perspective using OWASP and things like that. So that's what I did. I just put my hand up as a software developer and said, I'll do the cyber bits. I'll do the cyber bits. After about a year of doing that, so like the kind of more of like a DevSecOps role, really, I was pestering every single day the SOC, the Security Operations Centre, saying, I want to come and join you. Again, they'd never had a grad in there before. They'd never had anyone from a non-traditional background.
Why, just on the grad thing, why do you think that is? Because I know it's quite technology, it's come a long way, but still seems to be quite limited resource for grad schemes and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think at the time for the NHS, because the NHS deals with critical national infrastructure, I think the cyber team in particular were just a bit nervous about bringing someone junior in.
Yeah.
There was just a lot of mentality about, you'd have to have done this specific route. We want people a certain way. We want people with a certain amount of experience before we joined. But what I demonstrated to them was, one, that I started paying to go to cybersecurity conferences out of my own pocket. I started doing cybersecurity training, online and stuff like that. And they could see I was keen. And so someone, the CISO at the time, saw my enthusiasm and said, let's just give her a go and try it. If she's no good, we can put her back in dev land. And I remember my first week there, I was given all the grunt work, like you should do, to be honest. Tier 1 SOC analyst, there's a lot of grunt work. It was a very manual process. There's lots of copying and pasting from spreadsheets to spreadsheets and things like that. And I thought, there's got to be an easy way to do this because I'm spending my whole day just doing this grunt work. So I decided to script it.
Right.
And so I scripted the whole process, my BAU job, scripted it, so it was a one-click button. So something that took me all day originally was a one-click Python script. It ran it. And I just kind of washed my hands and said, what have you got for me next?
Wow.
And I think from then on, they were like, she can stay. She just saved us 1 day full-time equivalent. And I spoke to my boss who, until recently, was still there, and they still use that script to this day. And so,
Really? Wow,
yeah,
that's amazing.
I write pretty good code. So it's just about, I think what they realise is if you bring someone from the outside, they can bring out outside perspectives, but also outside skills. Now, they were traditional cybersecurity people. They weren't devs. So it probably occurred to them to script it, but then they would have to go learn how to script. And they had other things to do and things like that. But by bringing in new, fresh perspectives, I'd saved them 1 time full equivalent. That meant I could go and join another project where they needed my skills and contribute there. And so finding efficiencies has always been really key. But I think you can only really do that if you know the type of culture that you're working with as well.
In terms of cybersecurity then, to individuals and organisations who might not be as up to date on cyber, can you just give a quick overview of why it is important?
Yeah. The analogy I like to kind of compare it to is when you leave the house, how often do you actually think about locking your door? You don't really. It's so ritualised. You put the key in, you turn it. Only occasionally, if you've probably been a bit scattered, that you turn around and go, did I lock that door? You probably have done, because you are so used to that. When you leave the house, you put the key and you turn the door, right? We need to start thinking about our digital assets in exactly the same way. And that's why it's important, because it's all about, just like our real life assets, it's all very opportunistic. The day you forget to lock your door is the day probably someone nefarious is going to come around and just try that handle and go, oh, it's open, right? Or that lock looks rubbish. I'm going to be able to break into that. It's exactly the same principles. But I think there's something about it, the nature of it being online, and we're kind of on our own out there. I mean, when a cybercrime happens, it kind of feels like the Wild West. It's not like you can phone up the cyber police. You can phone up police, yes, of course, but there's only so much they can do. And they're really kind of struggling to kind of keep on top of that. But you kind of feel like you're on your own. I think that's where we see things like people not reporting cyber incidents as much. And when it comes to businesses as well, that's one thing we don't do very well in cyber is we don't knowledge share, because there is a lot of stigma in businesses about if you have a breach, you don't want to tell anyone unless you have to.
Yeah, I was going to mention that, to be honest. Do you think it's almost like a bit of embarrassment if it's happened to us? We don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, because the implications are, there's the reputational damage, there's a loss of trust, it's costly, there's always the line that always comes out when someone has a breach, but it is, we take cybersecurity very seriously. And if you did, maybe it wouldn't happen. I'm not saying that, even if you have the most robust cybersecurity in place, you will probably be affected by something at some point anyways. That's just the nature of the beast. But I think one of the things that's really hard in the cybersecurity industry is because there's so much stigma, we don't talk about it, we don't share best practices. I mean, one case I can really kind of point out where someone's done it completely different is the British Library. When they had their very, very public breach, and they got ransomware, and they didn't pay, and it took their systems down. I think they're still repairing at this moment. But one of the things they did that was kind of really great is they published a full, in-depth investigation for anyone to see. You can go download that now. And it is so comprehensive and so transparent. They point out and go, yep, we had our cybersecurity team tell us that we should be doing two-factor authentication. We had our cybersecurity team tell us that we needed to upgrade our systems and this and that, and we didn't do it. We didn't prioritize it. They're so transparent in it. But what's wonderful about it is because they're so transparent about it, I've used that document to do tabletop exercises to recreate that incident, because it could happen to anyone, because cybersecurity teams are the most under-resourced, underfunded, underloved areas of the business. And one of the mantras we say, which is terrible, but it's true, is, a breach is good for business, really, if they're a cybersecurity team, because that's when we get the funding we need.
Yeah.
We don't want it to be like that. We would love to be more proactive in what we do, but there's still a massive disconnect between organizations being proactive and prioritizing cyber when you can't prove that it's working. Because it's really hard to prove. Like, did we not have a breach this year because we invested, or did we not have a breach because we were lucky? It's really hard to kind of justify that.
Yeah, it's almost like being at a casino, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like, right, if you're going to gamble on it, you can take a gamble, but might pay off, might not.
Well, it's literally like insurance, isn't it?
Yeah.
One year you might not use it at all. You might use it for decades, and then all of a sudden you need it. So,
So do you think it's very much seen as a nice to have, not a must have?
I think it's changing. I think it depends on the business. Small businesses, they are doing the very best they can. I think there's a lot to be said about big organisations where they could do more in that space. And I think because what's really hard is that hard sell. When you're a non-revenue generating function like cyber is, it's really hard to say this is why you need to invest in it, other than just scaremongering, which you can't prove. As I say, you can't prove that it's going to happen. You can say, look, your peers, this happened to, say if you worked in an energy company, say, the other energy company next door did have a breach. Do you want to follow suit or not? Those might come for us next. What it's really about is kind of making yourself, the most undesirable target, because you're never going to be 100% secure. And a friend of mine, Simon Painter, a software developer, did this really great analogy. And he was saying, when you're walking down the street, if there's a bike with no bike lock, you're going to take that one. If there's a bike with a bike lock, depending on the bike, you might try and break into it. If there's a bike with 3 bike locks, you're not going to touch it. You're just going to walk on by. And that's what cybersecurity is about. It's about making yourself the more undesirable object. And that can be as much or as little as needed. The organisations I worry about, as I say, is the ones that do have the funding and capabilities to do it, but are not investing in that area. And I think there's a lot to be said about reframing cyber instead of a non-revenue generating function, saying it's revenue generating because the value add, the value proposition we can offer is not only prevention from masses of fines or having to rebuild stuff or losing data, is customers really value, I know I do, and I'm sure you do, customers really value people that don't pay lip service to actually keeping their data safe, their card details safe and things like that. So what I go in when I say to the business is like, it's not just about prevention, it's about making sure that our customers know that if they're going to work with us, invest in us as customers, then we're there to make sure that their data is safe. And that's a value proposition that you can't really tangibly buy, but it's a feeling. And again, going back to that anthropology thing, humans really care about that feeling of safety. It's in our evolution to feel safe and content and going, okay, I know my surrounding, I know I'm being taken care of. And there's a lot in cyber we can do about that. But I think because we focus quite a lot on the technology side, we forget about actually it's the human impact that's actually the biggest part. You hear about the grannies that, get scammed online and things like that. That human element is devastating.
Yeah. I suppose it's just like if someone breaks into your house,
Yeah.
it's personal. It feels like
icky, yeah.
Feels intrusive. And the same thing applies, as you've just mentioned there, with people getting scammed online.
Yeah.
It's not a nice feeling.
No.
Not a nice feeling.
No.
So I'm going to address the elephant in the room, AI. As we've mentioned before we jumped on this podcast. Do you think it's going to help or hinder cybersecurity?
Both. It's an arms race. I think any time where technology, regardless of what it is, whether it's AI or not, someone will do good with it, someone will do bad with it. Always, always, always. It's always going to be that way. Same with, cyber. A lot of the hacking tools that came about were to kind of understand networks, for example. They were legitimate purposes to look into, your network traffic, what is it doing? And then cybercriminals like, well, we can use this actually to snoop in on network traffic and understand what's going on there. AI is going to be exactly the same. One of the kind of common examples is, for example, phishing. So estimates are wide-ranging, as all these things are, but one paper I saw suggested that it's like 60% increase in phishing due to AI.
Wow.
In the last year, which is a dramatic amount. The problem is with that is a long time, my advice about phishing has been, hey, look out for spelling mistakes, look out for like emotional cues, look out for like dodgy logos that don't look quite right. AI has basically just taken everything that I would advise for you to look at and gone, ha, right? AI is really good at spelling and punctuation, much better than I am, and I'm an English literature student. It's got access to every single psychology book out there, so it can manipulate you like you wouldn't believe. Spear phishing, for example, where you really targeted phishing simulations, anyone could put me into ChatGPT and say, how would you spear phish Lianne Potter? Because I've got a podcast, I've written books, I've written articles, YouTube, all that stuff, podcasts like this, all that content. Would be like, all right, Lianne, okay, let's write her a spear phishing where we say, come and speak at our conference. Click on this link. And that's it, game over.
Scary.
And that would just be like appealing to my ego. Oh, I'd really, really like to get you on the show. And, I'm really. And that's how easy it would be. And that's how targeted it could be. And as I say, my advice now is I don't have any advice. And I can't. And as an industry, in cybersecurity as an industry, that's going to be the difficult part is cybersecurity in terms of advice about how to keep safe online has been quite consistent for a very long time. Don't click on that, strong passwords, all that lot. This is just going to blow out the water. And we have, as of yet, not figured out, especially the human element of how we fortify our defenses against that. From a technology perspective, it will help because it will help us with automation. One of the biggest difficulties in cyber is getting, millions of alerts all the time, alert fatigue, also not understanding the logs. Let AI sort all that out, let it understand that, tell us where we need to be worried, tell us where we need to act. That's great. However, on the flip side, the criminals will also be understanding, like, we're going to be using it for that. I'm like, all right, so how do we bypass that? And again, just that arms race. It's going to make it very difficult, just as much as it's going to help.
Yeah. I'm going to circle back to you now and your career.
Yeah.
One thing we like to ask is failures. We've all had them.
Yeah.
Can you think of one of your biggest failures and how you overcame it?
There's been occasions where I've tried to kind of push the cyber anthropology message forward, and it's not been well received. And it's not been well received because there's a big kind of community that doesn't believe that technology and the humanities should mix. And I've had delivered talks and tech conferences where people have stood up and say any questions and things like that, and it's not really been questions, it's more just been statements of just like, well, what's the point of giving people digital literacy? They shouldn't have access. If they don't know how to use it, they shouldn't have access. And it's a really hard one to kind of connect with, because in terms of how I perceive that as a failure is that I've not communicated that message of why humanities is so important to technology. And I'm still kind of finding my way with that and finding what is the best message to deliver on that. Because I totally see it from their side of it is, for a long time, there has been a big disconnect between technology and the humanities. And the reason why that's occurred is because there's been, for a long time, technology has been very literally binary. It's needed to be kind of cold and clinical. Technology wasn't originally invented for the masses. Think of the internet. The internet is one of the biggest military projects that ever existed because they wanted to create a non-capitalized network so that people, everyday people like me, you didn't have access to, so they could communicate around the world so that their enemies couldn't snoop in on communications and things like that. Technology hasn't always been invented for the mass to use. But as soon as things became more open access and, the internet became more prevalent, obviously people got a taste for it. And now, as I sort of said at the start of the conversation, that there's nothing we don't do that's not online. And I think for me, one of my biggest failures is still not being able to convince I would say, small subset of people that it is really important that people have a baseline knowledge. Because I think what people read when I say people need a baseline knowledge is an understanding is that they need access to like secret servers and secret databases and things like that. And that's not the case. But being able to participate in the conversation of how tech controls your life is very important, and it's going to be even more important with AI, because AI is going to be the most disruptive thing to humanity. And I really believe that it's going to be disruptive to work, education, the way decisions are made, and it's all concentrated in a small group of kind of Silicon Valley CEOs, really, and that's scary. That's scary that's the situation we're finding ourselves in at the moment.
Yeah, I'm just visioning, going back to that point that you mentioned about, an elderly person who might not be, quite as equipped or used to certain technology, and them getting a phishing email from that's been specifically designed to, target them. That understanding and education, I think, is so important.
Yeah.
Because that can really, it can ruin lives, and it can really, destroy businesses and all sorts. So you got my vote for it anyway. One other thing that I'd like to ask you before we finish is a solution. I suppose you've sort of mentioned it there with, the solution that you're working on is, trying to, align those two together. But is there anything else that you're working on right now that you want to tell us about?
Yeah, so my kind of I've started pivoting into what I like to call organizational cybersecurity. I've been doing it a little bit for a few years, but I've got an upcoming contract at the moment which is going to specifically look at that, and it's reframing cybersecurity is not just something the business does, but it's also something the business lives. So cybersecurity culture, but not just, as I say, like civilian culture, as in me and you clicking on something in our day-to-day lives, but actually, how does the organization perceive cybersecurity? How does going down to the granular level, so starting with the cybersecurity team, how do you see cybersecurity, and how do you think others around you perceive cybersecurity? And going to speak to other departments and going, okay, so let's ask that question again. So how do you see it? How do you think cyber sees it? And going around. When I've done that exercise and gone around, so ask the cyber team, what's your perception of cyber? It's usually quite negative. And then you go and they're like, oh, well, the software development team, they don't care. They don't care at all. It's just delivery at all costs. And then you go to the software development team and you say, tell me what you think about cyber. And they say, it's really important to me because I don't want to write a line of code that's going to bring down the organization. Nobody comes to work, usually, to do a bad job. And once you actually say, actually, the feedback I've got is a lot different. This is the perception of cyber. But because maybe the business is structured in such a way, and targeted usually in such a way that it makes being aligned with cybersecurity goals very difficult, that's when you see those kind of friction points. One thing I kind of sort of say is think about organizations in a tribal way. Going back to like my anthropology training, we are all in individual tribes. You're in your cybersecurity tribe, you're in your software development tribe, you're in your sales tribe, this, all in different tribes. You're all competing for different resources because that's the way the organization is usually set up. And if you're competing, someone has to fail for someone else to win. And that's not how organizations should be. But it just is. It's just how people are incentivized, because very few organizations have big picture thinking. So, for example, this is a non-cyber example, but if you've got a sales team that said you need to improve your sales for the next quarter by 25%. So the sales team goes sell, 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 sell. And then they sell a load of rubbish that customers get really angry about. And then all of a sudden you've got the customer service team. They're like, you need to reduce your calls by 25%. But because they've sold a load of rubbish, the salespeople, because they were incentivized to sell at all costs, then you've got your customer service team that are just running ragged, trying to deal with these complaint calls. And that's because they're incentivized in different ways. Whereas if you looked at the big picture, it's like, well, we want everyone to do well. And I think that's where a lot of organizations kind of fall down. So my project at the moment is bringing that anthropology, cybersecurity connection in a way that really encourages organizational cybersecurity. Because I don't think you can really say you do good cybersecurity unless it's organizational wide. And a lot of that is down to creating a better culture around cybersecurity. So that's what I'm working on at the moment.
That sounds really interesting. Sounds really, really interesting, and something that I've seen firsthand as well. So yeah, that's really good to know. Last question for you before we wrap up. If you could give one piece of advice to someone who is wanting to get into cyber, what would it be?
It's really tough to get into cyber. I still think it's one of the toughest parts of tech. My suggestion to you was, if you've tried to do it straight through and you're getting nowhere, is go via another area of tech. Once you're there, put your hand up for everything cyber related, because as I say in the story that I gave earlier, nobody wants to do cyber stuff generally. And again, it's not always because people don't want to do it. This year's maybe boring, maybe, I don't know. A lot of it is down to the fact that, people are scared to do cyber stuff because that means you're accountable for something, right? Because when things go wrong in cyber, that's bad news. I always say, that the day, someone brings down the company is the worst day of their life. So, you don't want to be held responsible. And we have a natural aversion to avoid being accountable in like high stakes situations like that. So it's not always necessarily because, people are not interested, but, if they don't have the skills or expertise to do it. So just take advantage where you can of those opportunities, because they will present themselves. Because as I say, nobody, wants to put the hand up for cyber a lot of the time in different teams and things like that.
Yeah.
Get that exposure, and then start making friends with the cybersecurity team from there on. I think there is a lot to be said, that there's a big thing in kind of like the discourse, I see it in government discourse, like there's a massive skills gap. There's not enough candidates. There's plenty of candidates, but I think when organisations don't prioritise cybersecurity or don't understand what cybersecurity is, I've seen so many roles lately where the cybersecurity teams where it's 5 or 6 different disciplines all rolled up into one role. It's like, I need someone who can do networks. I need someone who can do security operations, app security, this. It's like, no, that's 5 different people. And I think that's where we're seeing a lot of like the early careers. It's like, well, we don't really know what cyber is, so we can't really bring in junior people. So my big suggestion would be, if someone's starting out in this career, if you can't get straight into cyber, don't take it harshly. Just get into tech and then work from there.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Lianne. You've been great, and it's been awesome to have you on.
Thank you so much.